Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you, Matthew, for the opportunity to present today. Really fantastic webinar series, and I've tuned into a few of them already. Just wanted to say hello to everybody on camera to start with, so you know a face that's speaking, but I will share my screen now, which hopefully you can all see. So I've been involved with the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association since its inception in 2011, but I have been recently stepping back from day-to-day involvement and doing a little bit of freelance consultancy as well. But I'm going to take you through today what the organisation is, work, and touch on some of the relevant topics as well, such as diets and the environment as well. So hope it's of interest. So hopefully, there we are. So as an organisation, we really work to balance these three important things: and what works well on farm as farm practice for sustainable land management, together with the market for sustainably produced foods, and also the science and evidence that supports that as well. And really trying to find that common middle ground for all those three. And as an association, we are very much member-led. We're in fact a community interest company operating for the membership, and the core purpose has been really promoting pasture-fed livestock production and championing and advocating that. And we've grown as a community of farmers now to over 600 members, stretching right across the UK and also Ireland. And our central facet really and core is knowledge sharing, and we have a lot of that going on an online forum where our members are sharing knowledge and experience between one another, and it's become extremely powerful for helping farmers to adapt new practices on their farm. So we do supplement things in a normal year, obviously not this year, with study tours and farm visits where we get an opportunity to go and look around each other's farms and learn other. In fact, even though this year we haven't been able to do that, we've been running some interactive webinars. We've been doing live farm tours. We did one earlier this week with a farm in Wiltshire, another in Scotland, with those farmers out on their farms walking around the livestock and showing us. So we're continuing this knowledge sharing as a community even during these times. And also when we can, we would do more work to help farmers learn about creating products that meet the market requirements. So this sort of thing with training with the help of HDB and others. And further to that, one thing we've increasingly been doing is to really try and lobby government to the importance of sustainable land management, and in particular bringing in some of the regenerative farming practices that were mentioned in fact by Jonathan Bruni, who's pictured here next to George Eustace on the call last week. But ultimately, we've considered who really decides about how we manage our land, and is that government or is it us as the farmers? But ultimately, we concluded that really it's the consumers, and it's the consumers that vote when they purchase products. They want the management they really want to see. Although they may not always realise it, but it has a big bearing. The market influence has a big bearing on how we manage our land. So out of that thought was born the Pasture for Life certification mark as a means to recognise what we deemed as 100% pasture-fed beef, lamb and dairy produce from British farms. And we created this logo, and latterly that became a certification mark protected by the Intellectual Property Office. And behind that sits a set of production standards which are developed in tune with the members and in consultation with the members, but also in regard to the science, what the science shows produce reared in this way can create, which I shall touch on a little bit more. So in effect, the standards are grass-fed, and that there's no grain or soy or other products fed to animals and products that can carry this certification mark. And it's being now increasingly used to endorse and verify existing products, but also help to endorse existing brands as well. And we're seeing it pop up increasingly in the UK. And we have now almost 100 certified farmers stretching right across the UK. And I've shown here just a map of some of those that we have live at the moment. We have recently made the certification available in Ireland and have a few farmers working towards certification there as well. What's really interesting looking at this map is just quite how many different environments there are that farmers are working to and making the Pasture for Life system work. And that's a real credit to the farmers as individuals. What we've found is that their approach and their attitude towards land management is really what makes it possible and successful to have 100% pasture-fed livestock in all of these areas. And we're seeing more and more farmers crop up and proving that it's possible and finding many benefits to the farming in this way. So what really does it actually look like? Well, it's quite difficult to really put a definitive answer on that because there is a great deal of variation, as I mentioned, across the climate. But generally there tends to be more rotation, there's better management of grazing, and those animals tend to be moving around more. And that's not least important for the animals, but more important really is the rest periods that the land gets when it's not being grazed, and allowing grass plants and other species in the pasture to really grow and thrive and put down rooting and flowering and providing a multitude of benefits. And so we can start to see practice a little bit like this, where there is much more ground cover, much more forage starts to become established on the land, and the land isn't then overgrazed, but it's managed differently. Why we talk about pasture-fed rather than grass-fed is because we find that this image portrays really what grass is, but this portrays what pasture is. And for us, pasture has so much more diversity, and that is in fact very important for the balanced diet of animals, but equally good for the environment. And so it's really commonplace for us to see images such as this, where there might be at least 25 different species within the pastures that are providing a biodiverse diet for the animals and equally for the environment. But furthermore, this provides a great deal of benefit below ground, because all those different species above ground are providing lots of activity below ground that really helps to excite and host a very active soil ecology. So our farmers are really trying to work and monitor what's happening in their soil, because it's such a fundamental part of making this system work successfully. And so using things like the Soil Mentor app can help to monitor what's going on. And it's not always easy to measure particular parameters such as soil carbon, but there's lots of other proxy measures that can be used to monitor soil health. This can be a really good indicator to what's going on in terms of soil carbon. And in fact, there's a direct correlation between plant diversity and increased soil carbon in our pasture land soils. But what does this mean economically for farmers? Well, just to put into context, the picture for in this example, lowland grazing, is that financially most livestock farmers are struggling to make a profit without subsidy. And this presents a real challenge for the industry as a whole, and it's not uncommon. It's been this way for a long time. So we've been really focused on trying to see how the economics of Pasture for Life work for farmers adopting this approach. And we produced a booklet called It Can Be Done, which drills down into this using HDB benchmark figures. And we have a new publication of this coming out very soon, and it uses benchmarking figures and shows overall that the lower input costs do tend to increase the margin for farmers. And furthermore, if they can sell the product for a premium under the Pasture for Life label, this increases the margin even more. But really the core message is that the lower inputs result in greater margin. So be remiss of me not to touch on diet, and I know that for beef farmers and sheep farmers, this the whole diet has diet phases and fads and fashions have been a major concern. It's really interesting to see what's been going on in the last 12 months, and even how this has changed in more recent months since the COVID-19 lockdown. When we talk to people that are changing the diets or moving away from red meat, it's really interesting to see what their core drivers are and what motivates them to make that difference. And the one that's most increased really has been around climate change, and in particular how generally people are led to believe that cows are responsible for climate change, and images such as this are becoming quite commonplace. And really I wanted to tackle that today, because really this is based on a degree of misinformation that in fact came from the International Panel for Climate Change, which carried out a study looking at the direct emissions of livestock versus transport. And as we can clearly see here, they worked out that livestock account for 5% of emissions and transport was 14%. But the same study was done as a life cycle analysis, looking at all that goes into producing livestock and processing of the subsequent feed or milk and what have you, and the same for transport, the harvesting of oil, manufacturing, refinement, the burning of the fuel, and then the scrapping and processing of transport thereafter. And they worked out for livestock that this was 14.5% of emissions, but no one's yet figured out the figure for transport. But of course, what's ended up happening is that this 14.5% for life cycle emissions has been compared to the 14% of direct emissions of transport, and therefore people come to the conclusion that livestock in fact has a higher emissions than transport, which of course we know doesn't make sense. So as a group, we very much see that livestock are a very key part of the carbon cycle, and in fact they are the very tool that helps to drive that cycle in nature and on our farms. And I have to credit Smiling Tree Farm for this great illustration, which shows some of the interactions of carbon in a pasture system and how that cow is so central to all that goes on there. And of course, this system only really works when the inputs are minimalized or even excluded altogether, which is another reason when we developed the Pasture for Life standards that they were 100% pasture-fed and grain-free, minimizing the inputs of this natural carbon cycle and keeping it cycling for perpetuity. What we're now finding is that there's more research coming out and recognizing that methane from livestock units is different to methane produced from the burning of fossil fuels, and starting to compare those differently. And methane from ruminant animals has been around for a long time, but it also degrades over time. So there should be no net increase of methane from ruminant animals, and it's more the human-induced fossil fuel burning that we should be more concerned about. But of course, it's taking time to get this message out and overcome the misinformation. So I also wanted to continue touching on diet really, and also another driver for people turning away from red meat is what they believe it's done to diets, maybe impacting their health. And there's a very good authority in Dr. Zoe Harcombe worth looking up on many things in this field. But just to mention specifically the benefits that we're starting to measure for Pasture for Life produce is that it does in particular appear to be much higher in omega-3, and this is a particularly sought after nutrient for humans because we cannot create it ourselves. It's very difficult for us to get, in fact, from much of our diets as well, except from things like oily fish, where you might have heard of omega-3. But 100% pasture-fed beef, lamb and dairy produce is also very high in omega-3, and so a great thing to have part of your diet. And this really comes from the complex proteins that exist in plants to help them photosynthesize. And ruminant animals, the specialist animals for processing this otherwise hard to digest green leafy material, with their 4 stomachs can turn this into products that are of use to us, be that meat, milk or leather and wool. And it's no surprise therefore that a lot of those, that diet influences their milk and meat composition, in particular the omega-3s. And research from the United States shows how the introduction of grain to the diet of cattle in this particular case very quickly drops away. This is showing 3 particular types of omega-3s and how they are impacted with the introduction of grain in the diet. We've also been working with Newcastle University, who've done some work on Pasture for Life milk, and they are finding that the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3, and the lower the better in that case, is also helped with a 100% pasture-fed diet. And we can see here on the left the results of that, even at an even lower ratio than what is found in organic produce, and furthermore the conventional. And I should say at this point that we are not critical whatsoever of other farming systems. We're just sharing what we're finding and the differences we're seeing in comparison to other farming systems. And this is a very key point for selling to consumers and how we market products that carry good nutrition. And I wanted to touch on that market very briefly before I finish, to share some of the Google statistics for people sharing or searching for grass-fed online. And we can see from Google, and these are freely available for anyone to look up on particular search terms, how that in the UK, the searching for grass-fed has greatly increased. We can look at the same thing in the UK, comparing grass-fed beef and organic beef, and we see that the searching for grass-fed beef has very quickly caught up the searches for organic beef, and for many years now has in fact been running somewhat in parallel. We can take this a step further and look at it globally, and in fact the searches for grass-fed beef have really taken off and far beyond searches for organic, and we're particularly seeing the activity in the USA in this case, but also now increasingly around the world, where more consumers are looking for grass-fed beef and other grass-fed products found in a way that they feel is in tune with what they want to buy into. So our final challenge really is, as an organisation, is breaking through the supply chain and finding routes to market. And it's certainly not easy to do this because there are so few points in the middle, usually in the case of abattoirs, in beef supply chains. There are so few points, it's quite difficult to get product through when those abattoirs are in the hands of quite a few. And so there's been quite a move to how we can address that as a community of farmers, and there are initiatives such as a mobile abattoir being explored to help create new supply chains for our farmers. But fundamentally, it's difficult pushing a product uphill, pushing it through a supply chain, through a narrow point. So as an organisation, we're restructuring and changing our focus now to the right-hand side, to the final customer, the consumer, and trying to generate more of a pull. If we get the customer pulling the product into the market, the supply chain infrastructure will respond and allow those products to flow through. So you might have seen we've done a short video promoting Pasture for Life as a group of farmers to really captivate the consumer, get them looking for the product, looking where to buy it, and in turn that helping to drive a change in the way farmers manage their land and a move towards more sustainable land management in the way that we see it regarding beef, lamb and dairy production. So that's in a very quick nutshell what we're all about. Please do visit the website and look up any more information you wish, or drop me a line if you'd like to ask any questions, and do follow us on social media where we'll be sharing some more of our webinars in due course. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, Tim.